Most people think to stand out in this business, you need to be the first one on top of the story or the person with the loudest voice or the biggest ratings. In truth, to stand out in the news business, you just need to ask the right questions and demand the right answers.
Provoke, inform, and change. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Academia University. Open, free, that means no tuition, with no entrance restrictions. Well, hello everybody, welcome back to the next edition of iNet's Tweetline Plus. A news channel where you will find, a news channel and program where you will find news and information analysis that you will not see anywhere else. Let's get started. My name is Dr. Daniel Karras, and it is now 22 hours and 58 minutes into the day of Wednesday, January 4th, 2017. And yesterday we talked a lot about we began to get into the AIPAC factor. We got into the fake news, and into what we're going to continue on now is the assassination watch. We're trying to protect the back of Donald Trump. Please share this. It's Creative Commons. You can share it around as much as you want. Let people know about this. Like it, thumbs up. Get as many people to view this as possible. And yesterday's edition as well. They can view as much as they want. The issue here is that we need to inform people. People need to know what's actually going on with behind the news. And I've discussed this before, and I'll bring this up again, is that the fake news is not a new thing. The issue of the fake news is new, but it's not a new thing. All we have to do is go back to 9/11, go back to the issue of the dancing Israelis in the streets. And this was reported. ABC actually had, for about a week, they had this dancing Israeli thing. And then after a week it disappeared. Never discussed again. And the entire Israeli aspect, the Mossad aspect, has completely disappeared. It's only when you get into some of the conspiracy theorists, the people who have sat down and done some more work on this, and now, of course, most of the conspiracy theorists have been sort of, quote-unquote, debunked. And so, it's a conspiracy theory, or you're one of those conspiracy theorists. And this is how mainstream media gets you, and gets a lot of those people. It conditions them. It's a conditioning. The mainstream media conditions people to accepting the government's line because it paints the opposite view, any alternative view, as conspiracy theory. Without necessary, and the thing is, there is no qualifier. There's no background qualifier. There's no, well, why is it conspiracy? Why do you consider this to be conspiracy theory? And the thing is, what happens is that the way they get around this is that many people, if they see a crowd, and this is sort of this was not lost on Sigmund Freud, it was not lost on Edward Bernays, who understand that mob psychology, that group psychology is real. And that people in a crowd will tend to do what the crowd is doing. This is crowd psychology, this is group psychology, this is mass psychology, the psychology of the society, if you will. And every nation has a psychology. They has a pattern behavior, has an understanding of things, whether it's true or not. This is the national narrative, the national story, and people believe it without challenging it, because it's most the national story. And so no one actually, the average person will not go in and sort of question and say, well, how did you get this information, or where did you get it from? And so the result is you have a narrative that may or may not be false. And in many cases, and this is the way a lot of propaganda works, is there is a string of truth. And this is why, you do actually have to go and look at propaganda sometimes, whether you like it or not, because you want to find out where the truth is and where the lie is. You need to sort of separate the two and begin to understand what it is. And even when you bring out the lie, the tendency is, because people are in the environment of the mainstream media, even if you can prove it to them, they'll reject the proof and prefer the lie. Because what happens when they go back into the mainstream media environment, they're sitting around with family, they're talking with family, you have a discussion, a political discussion at dinner with a whole group of different people, they're going to tend to believe and bring out the standard government line. In other words, they're going to bring out the line that is popularly in the news. And it becomes a battle for the person who stands out and says, no, this is not correct. And there are many people out there who don't want this battle. They don't want a battle. They'll have a discussion, but they don't want the battle. So what will happen is that they'll see the truth, and as you go through your discussion with this person, and this is not indicative of education. It could be from any level, including professors and researchers and whatever. Geniuses will do this as well. And what happens is that they get bombarded with this attack. They get attacked when they have this alternative view. In other words, if you don't have the proper mainstream view, you then become attacked. And someone who might come to your defense is a conspiracy theorist. And I've met a few conspiracy theorists. And then at first their argument seems, okay, this is logical. But then, as they begin to unwind the conspiracy and connect all the different branches, all of a sudden everybody's involved in the conspiracy. The Jews, the Vatican, and they're all in it. And it's all fixed, it's all this and all that. But you look at history, you begin to realize that history doesn't work like that. You look at the real history. There was a conspiracy. The Skull and Bones was in on World War II. They thought World War II. They thought a lot of people thought that Hitler would succeed. He didn't. He didn't succeed. Neither did we see a success in World War I for the Germans. Right? Look at Napoleon. Did that New World Order, the Napoleonic New World Order, did that survive? No. And this is what we're seeing now in this whole thing of this whole migration crisis. Why do we have this migrant crisis in Europe? Well, if you know your history, if you go back into why they're going over to France like that, why they're going to Italy, why they're going to Europe, it's because these nations that are collapsed and falling apart that Europe was meddling in were their former colonies. Begin to understand this is the colonies falling apart. That this is colonial Europe. The results of colonial Europe. Then you begin to have a better understanding as to, well, if Europe doesn't want all these migrants, then Europe shouldn't have had all these colonies. They should have let them go. They should have let them be free. But they never did. They changed the definitions of what the relationship was between these countries. But if these countries ever dared put in a government, elect a government that the Europeans didn't like France didn't like, they go in and overthrow the government. This is what we saw with Obama. African nations and Middle East had governments that Obama didn't like. He went in and overthrew them. This is standard.
INN. Provoke, inform and change. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Academia University. going beyond textbooks. However, typically, when you're having a discussion, and because most of these people are involved with the mainstream media and involved with, not even involved, but sort of embedded in it, they've been conditioned the way they have. And none of this stuff comes out in mainstream media. They don't know about this stuff. It's outside their experience. So this, when you start talking like this, talking about things, and particularly even the conspiracy theorists, they don't consider a lot of the history that there's been a lot of failure, and that these sort of so-called conspiracies are very loosely based. Maybe people know about them, they know about the history. All you have to do to understand these conspiracy theories is go to a library and read to see what's in the library there, go into a popular section. I mean, I'll give an example here for those of you who know about, know about or seen about it, or seen it. These so-called anime conventions. These are the conventions where all these nerds dress up as their favorite character. They're basically comics. They go to these conventions. They're all dressed up, and well, how do these people get all these costumes together? Is it one conspiracy that everybody knows exactly what's going on and they've scripted it? No. It's what happens. These people have a common interest, and in their common interest, they read certain things that are common to the whole group. Right? They're just like Star Wars. There's a huge group of Star Wars fans. There are people who are Star Wars fans will go to every single movie. They'll camp out every single movie. And matter of fact, they'll dress up as the characters and go to these movies. Is this one vast conspiracy where everything is scripted? No. This is commonality. The same thing occurs in politics. There is a commonality amongst various different groupings. And what happens, though, the conspiracy theorist takes this and unifies the entire thing and says, this is one massive conspiracy that everybody's on the group and everything is scripted. And as soon as people start hearing this, or think they're hearing this because of what the mainstream media has done to conspiracy theorists, in terms of the way they've presented them, and even conspiracy theorists have done this to themselves, by lumping everything together and not really differentiating between the different ideas, or acknowledging that there are different ideas involved. They create the environment, the economy, that is excellent for psychological manipulation, what Edward Bernays or Sigmund Freud would call managing the herd, right? The bewildered herd. They don't view man or people, the average person, to be a human being. They view them as animals, as cattle, as people, or as sheep. So sheeple, capel, right? Instead of cattle, capel. Instead of sheep, sheeple. These are people to be herded. And this is what mainstream media does. And mainstream media is not simply the news. It's the entertainment you watch. It's the radio you listen to, the music you listen to, what you read, how you read it. And it goes from the very bottom of society all the way up to the high levels of society. There is no fundamental restrictions in terms of the where it is and where it isn't. There is a public view that is created by Edward Bernays. This is his work that he took from Sigmund Freud. So Sigmund Freud does the initial work, does a lot of the psychological analysis, writes the stuff up. Edward Bernays, his nephew, takes it and turns it into PR and basically the whole mechanisms of psy-ops, the psychological operations where you're there to manipulate society into believing one thing or another. And these are usually for strategic and military purposes. And the thing is that this is what's going on in mainstream media. Mainstream media is not simply, one mishap after another. What happens is that mainstream media is not a monolithic conspiracy, but rather it's a loosely constructed conspiracy. And here's how a loosely constructed conspiracy works. You don't take people who know what's going on. You take people who believe or have a common belief or a common interest like you do. And you convince them that what they're doing is right and everybody else is wrong. In other words, you back up their ideas. You support them. And as you push and support these ideas, and you convince them not to look elsewhere, not to question outside, you convince them that everybody else outside up there is wrong, and that they're trying to deceive you, you now create a condition of indoctrination where you have these sheeple, these cattle, and these are your anchors, your news anchors, who don't do the research. They're simply reporting the news. They're reading the news off a teleprompter. Somebody else has done the research. They haven't done the research. That's why they have a whole news team, right? And you look on Oprah, there's a segment producer. That producer, there's one producer for every segment, however many segments they have on Oprah, and one producer produces each segment. So it's not one person producing the entire show. It's multiple producers, each one having their own segment. But if you can get people who have a like mind or a like understanding, then you can put together a show that is, in terms of the overall psychology, the group psychology, to appear as being unison, to being one. This is how politics works. This is why rallies, political rallies, are so important, is to bring people together, to bring the mindset together. It's group psychology. It's mass manipulation. This is what PR is. PR is mass manipulation. Consumerism, what you buy and what you don't buy, is mass psychology. It is mass manipulation. It is the capital. It is the sheeple. It's the herding of the bewildered animal, of these sort of animals who need to be herded. That's what this is. This occurs in mainstream media in terms of politics. People's political views are often based on common understandings of things. What are your common experiences? People will tend to be within these so-called peer groups. Your peer groupings are experiences that are common to the particular group. When a person who is in that particular group steps outside of that experience and is sufficiently different from the common core, he is rejected from that society, that group, as an outsider, because he's now left the common core, he's now left the common experience, and is experiencing something else. And what happens to this experience, the views that he sees now that were shaped by these experiences, changes his perspective. And so now when he's talking to these people, he's bringing in information that they do not understand because it's not within their experience. And the society that he's in will tend to reject these ideas because they are not common, not because they're wrong, because they are not common to that society. And this is the conditioning that's going on in the mainstream media. And this is why news is really psychology. And we're doing this psychology not from the textbook, but from an observational perspective. This is the science here. This is the research. And this is something that's hard to understand because it's not something that can be done overnight. It's not a repetitive process in terms of you're doing the same thing every night. You're just simply repeating the news. You're reporting the news, and that's it. You have to develop an understanding from your observations as to what's happening. And this is where you say, we see that if you look at these things carefully, you look at what happened at 9/11. The Israelis dancing in the streets that Donald Trump reported were Arabs. When the police actually because they filed these reports, went to check up on these Arabs dancing in the streets, going, hooray, hooray, hooray. They weren't Arabs. They were Israelis. They were Mossad. But that information never gets out. It does trickle out to a certain degree to the conspiracy theorists, but they never go that far. In other words, you look at the conspiracy theorists, they connect these dots, some of these dots, but they connect it very loosely, and never bother going into some of the details that, while may trouble the conspiracy theory. In other words, they themselves never step outside their own theories. They don't analyze their own theories to say, well, is my understanding of this situation right? What this does do, it brings us to an understanding now that The news is manipulated. There is mass manipulation. The sheeple, the blind agents, are primarily the tools. This gives you an understanding to go in to see what's going on in the Middle East, all these the wars, the assassinations, the whole bit, and put together a better understanding of things. Israel, if you understand the history of Israel, you go into the history of Kabbalah, and I told you about this, the history of Kabbalah is essential to understand the formation of Israel. Because it's the Kabbalah, out of the Kabbalah, the people who were in Kabbalah, the rabbis there, because it was a rabbinical movement, and the primary God there wasn't the God we could think of. It wasn't the God of the chosen people. It was Baal. Baal was one of the gods. And in Baal, that religion of Baal, the Kabbalist religion there, the Kabbalah religion, there is the sacrifice of people, and particularly the sacrifice of children. This is how war gods work. You can look at any war god. Go study anthropology. Look at the war gods. They required sacrifices, and usually of young people. So this is not something that's outside of the pagan norm. This is what paganism was. And this is why the early Christianity, the Christianity before Europe came around, was so fundamentally different. It did not require a sacrifice. It did not require a sacrifice of children. Matter of fact, the child that is sacrificed in the early Christian divine liturgy is Christ himself. They do sacrifice. There is a sacrifice of a child in the divine liturgy. That's what the divine liturgy is about. It's about that sacrifice. That sacrifice is Christ himself. In other words, when you step into an early divine liturgy, early Christian divine liturgy, you're not simply stepping into a church. It's supposed to, and this is the theology of it, it takes you outside of the dimensions of earth and space and time. So you're standing outside time, you're standing outside space. You are now connected to all events within history, particularly the Christ's history, the church's history. And you are present there with all the other people who have experienced this. This is the family experience that you get during the divine liturgy, and you get it at no other time. So outside of church, in the early Christian church, the reason why you went to church is because you were there with everybody else in the family. This is the only time you were able to get that family experience. Otherwise, outside the church, you had an individual relationship with God, you had an individual relationship with Christ, with the saints, and you had that familiar relationship as at home as a dinner. But you didn't have the experience that you had in church, where you were there in heaven. In other words, the earth didn't open up, the skies didn't open up, the heavens didn't open up. And they talk about heavens in plural, not meaning just the sky with all the clouds, but they're talking about parallel universes here. This is where we're getting into M theory now. This is the situation. It was changed about 1000 AD. Well, started in 800 AD, moved to 1000 AD to become a war god. So that they are now Christians were now allowed to go to war. You could have conquest. This is the formation of Europe. Again, none of this comes into the textbooks. This is not part of common history. And this is why I don't use the term BCE or before the Common Era or after the Common Era or or the Common Era, because there is no such thing as the Common Era. History goes by various different events, and for some reason, you can make an argument over this, why Christ forms the central point in history the way it does. But anyways, there is a before Christ and an after Christ. This is the way the functioning of the earth works in terms of the history of earth, the history of man. And you begin to see the formation of the Zionists from this Kabbalist line. And they are not true Israelis, but they are able to convince the Protestants and the Catholics that they are the true, genuine Jews. And they fill in a lot of the gaps that are now left in this sort of empty, hollowed out new Christian religion of the West. And this is how Israel forms its relationship with Europe and the United States. And the reason why Russia is against us is because Russia was outside of this relation. Russia did not experience the Kabbalist revolutions, the Kabbalist influence, because it stayed with the older Eastern Orthodox Church. This is why Russia is now celebrating Christmas on January 7th, because January 7th, that's when Christmas is on the early Christian tradition, and I'm saying now so-called Orthodox, because there are many wolves in sheep clothing. There are not a number of Orthodox churches who look Orthodox, but they're really Catholic. They're really Western churches. The European churches, they're not actually Orthodox. They're not actually Eastern. They simply look like it. They dress like that. And they allow their liturgies look like this, and they have a facade to them. And this is what I was talking about. This is that the Christians really, in many cases, live this facade. And behind this facade is Kabbalah, in one form or another. And this is where you connect back to Israel, and now also back in from Israel, you go back into the United States and deal with AIPAC, right? The American Israeli Political Affairs Committee. And then you see that this is not because they're stupid, in terms of the AIPAC people. This is because they understand this manipulation. They understand how to work the manipulation. That they're able to convince people in power that they're needed. And so they are able to work their way into positions of power that the average person, the average other culture, would never be able to do. And this is, unfortunately, to their detriment. This is what causes a lot of the anti-Semitism that goes around. Anti-Semitism in many cases is not simply an empty thing. Or I hate the person because they're a Jew. It's a lot of times the anti-Semitism actually is there's an experience behind there, a negative experience. And once again, like the conspiracy theorists, they take this one general experience and they apply it generally to the entire population. And again, this is wrong. And this is why you don't go, if you're looking at Israeli information, you want to find out what the Israeli hand is, you don't go to an Aryan Nation website. You don't go to a white supremacist website to find out about the Jews. Where do you go? You go to Israeli sources. And I've found a number of very good Israeli sources. And I've begun to understand about Israel in ways that I have never really thought about them before. They are a much more complex society. In other words, this is going back to the conspiracy theory again. It is not a monolith. It's not one thought. As I explained before about Benjamin Netanyahu. He's not simply the head of Israel. He's the prime minister of a coalition. He has people that he has to answer to. If he doesn't keep this coalition happy, find ways to get these coalitions to work together, that normally they're battling each other. And I see this from the number of, because online you can watch these rabbinical lectures, and you can attend these rabbinical conferences. And I've gone to a number of these rabbinical conferences online, or watch these things. The views by rabbis are fundamentally different from each other. Matter of fact, different to the point that they will battle each other. They will not allow, certain rabbis will not allow other rabbis and their people into their streets. They block the streets off. This isn't unity here. And so what happens, Benjamin Netanyahu has to pull this unity together. And as I've gone around the Jewish community, I found a lot of good sources on the history of Israel. And what the history of Israel is not what's being presented in the news. It's not presented in AIPAC either. There is a manipulation going on with AIPAC. And this manipulation has a lot to do with American history and where things end up going in terms of how the political narrative plays out. And we'll continue with this thread in our next episode of INN's Tweetline Plus, and we'll get deeper into these stuff on INN's Headlines and Beyond, which should be coming this weekend, because I'm now starting to get my notes together. All right, see you then.
INN. Provoke, inform, and change. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Academia University. Open, free, that means no tuition, no entrance restrictions.
I am the professor. And professor of what? Professor of physics.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
Free speech rules here at Democratic Earth.